Good afternoon, everybody. This is Margaret Rooney speaking. I am a regional assessor with NQA, and I've also been very involved in our preparations for the new standards, the 2015 standards. This is the first of a series of webinars that we are holding to keep you informed about the changes to the standards. And today's webinar is concentrating specifically on Annex SL, and I'll explain what that is in just a moment. And we refer to this as the common thread. You should see to the right of your screen a box marked chat. And we'd encourage you to submit any questions or comments that you may have, both during this presentation and at the end. We will be allowing some time for questions and answers, and we will read the questions that are submitted. We hope that you will join us for future webinars, and we very much value your feedback. We'd like to know what you actually think of these webinars, and of course that can be done through the chat box. So, going into the detail of today's presentation, Annex SL, the common thread. What is Annex SL? Well, when we use the term the common thread, it's because Annex SL is common to all future management system standards. And the two upcoming standards that we are looking at very closely at the moment, ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, are both structured around what is known as Annex SL. And it's an ISO directive, or taken from an ISO directive. And for those of you that are interested in this detail, and it's not essential to using the standards, but it might be helpful to be aware that there is an ISO directive relating to the drafting of standards, and specifically within this directive, and I have the details on the screen here, the consolidated ISO supplement, procedures specific to ISO, there is within that an Annex SL, proposals for management system standards. And within that there is a further appendix, high-level structure, identical core text, common terms, and core definitions. And what this sets out is the structure for management system standards. So in future, all management system standards must be structured around this Annex SL structure. As I say, we've got the two standards coming up very soon, 9001 and 14001, and the health and safety standard will be coming along in a year or two, and that also will need to be structured around Annex SL. And it serves several purposes. It was quite a landmark event, I believe, that ISO made this decision to have a common structure for the management system standards. It helps to ensure that they can be easily integrated across a business. There are many standards, many management system standards that you may wish to be certified to, so it makes sense that they have a similar structure, and therefore it allows integration of all of those standards and those systems. And it applies, as I've already said, to all management system standards. That would be full ISO standards, as well as technical specifications and what we call publicly available specifications, the PAS documents. From here on in, they will all have the same high-level structure. And we have here the list of clauses, main clause headings, relating to the high-level structure. So every management system standard that you see from here on in, any new management system standards will all have this common clause structure, clause names. So we have scope, normative references, terms and definitions, context, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. And I'll talk around each of those today. The first Annex SL clause is scope. This covers the intended outcomes and boundaries between which the management system applies. So the scope will be dependent on the standard that you wish to implement, and there should be alignment between your scope and what you determine in Clause 4. Clause 4 is a context clause, and we'll come to that shortly. I think it's fair to say that you're probably very familiar with the concept of a scope. It's something that we've all been working with for quite a while. Normative references, again, all management system standards using this high-level structure will have a section called normative references, and this is where we reference other ISO standards relevant to the standard that we are implementing. And interestingly, in the ISO 9001 standard that's coming along, the normative reference cited is the ISO 9000 2015 Quality Management Systems, Fundamentals and Vocabulary. So that is the normative reference. All of the definitions within that standard are relevant to ISO 9001. 14001, on the other hand, has no normative references, and that committee has chosen to put any references, definitions within the standard itself. The third clause is terms and definitions. So if there are further definitions applicable to that standard, they can be introduced here. In Annex SL, there are actually 21 definitions, and that includes terms such as interested party, top management, risk, outsource. So those terms and definitions are common to all management system standards. Interestingly, in the 14001 FDIS, you will find 33 terms and definitions, whereas in the FDIS for 9001 there are no given terms and definitions. We are simply referred to the normative reference ISO 9000 2015. Moving more into the meat of Annex SL and the meat of the future management system standards, we have Clause 4, context of an organisation. And the context will take account of things like the organisation's goals and intended outcomes, internal and external issues, the relevant interested parties, and of course the scope of the management system itself. Collectively, this gives us a key insight into the organisation. I'll expand a little bit on that because some people have had questions around what exactly we mean by context. These are the actual Annex SL clauses relating to context. So in 4.1 we have understanding the organisation and its context, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties, determining the scope of the relevant management system, and in 4.4 some detail on the management system itself. The X's, incidentally, are lifted directly from Annex SL because this is a generic set of requirements for any management system. The detail comes in when we look at the particular sectors or the particular standard that is being written. A definition that we have lifted, as it happens, from an earlier version from the DIS. What do we mean by context of the organization? Well, we could refer to it as the business environment. We can refer to it as a combination of factors and conditions that have an effect on an organization's approach to its products, services, investments, interested parties. And it's equally applicable to not-for-profit or public service organizations as it is to for-profit organizations. I find it easier with a concept like context to think in terms of actual examples rather than definitions. We've listed a few examples of very different types of organizations that NQA work with, and all of these different types of organizations hold NQA certificates of various kinds. Water companies, universities, local government. We have some local government departments, for example, building control departments. We have landscape businesses, and I can think of one that operates from a tiny office in the back garden. And we have electrical contractors who operate well down the supply chain and are required to be highly flexible. Each is a very different type of organization. It's very different, therefore, in governance, complexity, the customer base, the speed of response needed, the speed of decision-making required, and the degree of formality required. And each of these facets influences, or should influence, how we view the management system requirements, and therefore how we as auditors arrive at our conclusions. And I think that hopefully thinking of it in that way, context makes sense, and how we approach our management systems and what we expect of our management systems will depend on the context. I think it's how we've always, and I mean clients and assessors alike, it's how we've always worked, but the new standards and Annex SL have made this more explicit. Another Annex SL clause is leadership, and this is a new term in management system standards. In the past we had management requirements, but the emphasis in Annex SL is very much on leadership. And we have the 3 Annex SL clauses relating to leadership, or subclauses: leadership and commitment, policy, organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. So emphasis is on leadership and not just management. And key to the Annex SL requirements is that top management have to have a greater involvement in the management system, or have to be seen to have a greater involvement in the management system. And the requirements of the management system need to be integrated into the organization's overall business processes. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an add-on, it's integral to the organization's processes. So the requirement for leadership is explicit, and leaders must be able to demonstrate that they are actively involved. The requirements around policy have been strengthened, and very interestingly, there's no explicit requirement for a management representative. Very carefully said there, no explicit requirement, because if you have a management representative, you certainly can carry on working in that way. please do feel free to submit your questions and comments during this presentation, and we'll address your questions and comments at the end. Planning. The Annex SL clauses or sub-clauses are around planning. We have 6.1, actions to address risks and opportunities, 6.2, objectives and planning to achieve them. The objectives will be related to whatever sector or particular standard it is that we are looking at. And interestingly, in Annex SL, in this high-level clause planning, we are introduced to the concept of risks and opportunity. So it will be important to have some familiarity with risk, or to have thought about risk. Risk being the consequences of an event and the associated likelihood of occurrence. And you need to think about how you avoid, eliminate, minimize, or mitigate your risk. Risk, of course, is fundamentally the reason why management system standards came into being in the first place, although I think in more recent years we've perhaps not explicitly thought in that way. And risk, of course, is something every business is addressing all the time, even if you're not consciously addressing risk. Much of what you do will be for that very reason, to minimize problems, to reduce risk. Don't forget, of course, there may be risks, but there are also opportunities that the business could have, and you want to be identifying those and optimizing those, as well as identifying your risks. Risks and opportunities identified will lead to your policies, and those policies should lead to the objectives, the measurable objectives that you will set. That's following the logic there, from risk through to your objectives and managing those objectives. So there should be a clear path following through. So Annex SL really just makes all of this more explicit, a lot clearer than perhaps earlier versions of the management system standards. Now we have clause 7, the support clause, and this is broken down into several sub-clauses: resources, competence, awareness, communication, and documented information. And documented information is further broken down into general requirements, the creating and updating of documentation, and the control of documented information. I think a lot of those things are already very familiar to you, but these are all the support elements of your management system that are important to help you to deliver your core products and services. The requirement in Annex SL relating to awareness, the importance of awareness has been strengthened. So now everyone needs to know the implications of not conforming to the management system requirements. In Annex SL, the requirements for awareness and communication are crisper, and the organisation needs to consider communication requirements, both internal and external communications relevant to the management system. In other words, what, when, and with whom will you communicate? And that is going to depend on the specific management system that you have in place. The requirements in Annex SL for the management of documented information are much as we're used to. There's nothing particularly new, exceptional or excessive in the Annex SL requirements. Interestingly though, in Annex SL and in the subsequent FDISs that we see for the new standards, the terms procedure, manual and records are not used. That is terminology that is no longer used in management system standards because they're not used in Annex SL. Moving now to the clause on operation. Operation is, of course, addressing the core business. It lies at the heart of what it is you actually exist to do, the core products and services that you produce. But interestingly, it's actually a very short clause within Annex SL because it's here that there's the greatest scope within the specific management system standards to expand into your sector-specific content. And we will be having future webinars addressing those sector-specific issues with the 9001 and 14001 FDIS requirements. But at the high level Annex SL, there's not a lot of detail on operation because that detail will depend on the specific standard required. And I just noted there, this clause is massive. If any of you have actually looked at the 9001 FDIS, you will see that this is a very substantial clause. I've reproduced here, and I think it's the only place in this presentation that I've actually reproduced so much, a total clause from the Annex SL. 8.1 operational planning and control. So terminology, I think that will be familiar to you. You shall plan, implement and control the processes needed to meet requirements and to implement the actions determined in 6.1. And 6.1 is where we looked at actions to address risks and opportunities. So in 8.1, in our operational planning, we establish the criteria for processes. We implement control of those processes as required, and we keep documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned. The whole terminology there, I would suggest, is familiar to us. Again, noting the use of keeping documented information to the extent necessary. So the terminology here is very much documented information. So you will control any planned changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary. I think this is all very familiar management system thinking. The organisation shall ensure that outsourced processes are controlled. We see terms coming in like outsourced processes. This would incorporate the purchasing requirements that were in the previous versions of the standard. So, at its core, the organisation needs to, in direct quotes from the previous slide, plan, implement and control the processes. So this addresses both in-house and any outsourced processes, as we mentioned. Overall process management includes having the criteria for the processes, controlling those processes, controlling changes and addressing unintended change. This is where the bulk of each discipline requirements will be. So as I keep emphasising, there's not an awful lot of detail in Annex SL because the detail will depend on the particular standard that you're implementing. And those of you who who later in the week will be listening into the 9001 presentation will see the additional detail that's required there, for example. And very important to this, of course, is an understanding of the business context. The detail in Clause 8 will depend on the type of business and will depend on the context of that business or not-for-profit organisation, whatever the case may be. Moving now to Clause 9, performance evaluation. The Annex SL high-level clauses break down into three main areas: monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. Evaluation being a new term that's creeping into all of the management system standards. And then we have our old friends, internal audit and management review. And performance evaluation relates to the activities that we've carried out, our operations. They will have been detailed within Clause 8, and we now check how our operations are performing. And the Annex SL, as we've just seen, directly cites monitoring, measurement, evaluation. It cites internal audit and management review. Nothing terribly new there. And finally, moving into the high-level clause improvement, we have familiar headings really: non-conformity and corrective action. This comes into the area of improvement and continual improvement in Clause 10.2. So we've got our non-conformity and corrective action and the activities that we need around that, and there's also continual improvement, the requirement to continually improve. These, I would suggest, they're familiar to us and well understood. Interestingly, another term that does not appear in Annex SL and does not appear in the subsequent management system standards arising from that is the term preventive action. And the reason for that is that really the objective, one of the objectives of an effective management system is preventive action. So the explicit and separate requirement that we have up to now for preventive action, that does not feature in Annex SL and hence does not appear in other standards. So as clients, and certainly for ourselves as assessors, there are a number of new challenges that Annex SL and the subsequent management system standards present us. Context, having a clear understanding of the context is going to be very important. As I've said near the beginning, I think it's something we've always been aware of and always worked with, but it's become quite explicit with Annex SL, and it's important across all the management system standards. Leadership, the significance of leadership has been enhanced with Annex SL, with requirement for very visible, transparent leadership and integration of the management system into the overall business. Risks and opportunities are explicitly stated within Annex SL. We need to be mindful of those as part of our management system. The concept of processes, it has been in existence in previous versions of the standards, but again, it's given prominence in Annex SL. A big challenge is that there could potentially be systems with potentially less documentation. The requirement for documentation. There's less of it, shall we say, within Annex SL. And I've suggested here we should avoid the temptation to use the Annex SL requirements as a checklist. The key to effective implementation will be subtlety of approach and professional judgment. Now I say that because things like, well, all of the things listed on the slide there, context, leadership, risk, processes, the existence or otherwise of documentation, the need or otherwise for documentation, that will pervade the whole management system. They are not separate items to be audited against, shall we say. That's all that I want to say at the moment on Annex SL. Clearly the detail will come about with the specific standards that you are interested in implementing or transitioning to. But that's a quick run through the high-level requirements, the ISO high-level requirements, which, as I say, will influence and be a key part of all future management system standards. And I have a number of questions and comments coming in now. Right, the first question, are we okay to continue to use the terms missing from Annex SL, for example, procedure and manual? Definitely, yes, you are free to use any terminology that you wish. It's your management system. You feel you use terminology that you wish to, and there's nothing to stop you doing that. What will happen at our NQA audits? There will be a process, and we'll be giving you more detail on this, but there will be a process of us informing you how we will go about helping you to transition from existing management system standards to the 2015 versions. So there will be specific guidance on that, and of course we are in the process of training and informing our assessors on the new requirements to the standards and what different approaches, shall we say, might be needed to audit in certain areas. I hope that answers your question for the moment, but certainly we will be giving you a lot more information about the transition. I have a question here. Could things like flowcharts be a suitable replacement for long, wordy manuals that we may currently have? I would say yes. A good flowchart is extremely helpful, and if it's helpful to you and makes sense to an auditor, yes, that would be a good way of defining your processes. Question here, haven't heard anything about aspects and impacts. I guess they will still be included in the new standard, and would risks and opportunities be related to them? Yes, aspects and impacts certainly still feature in the FDIS for ISO 14001. These are terms that are specific to a sector or sectors, so they don't appear as such in the Annex SL, but we do see the term risk in Annex SL. Next question, would you say in terms of context that for most organizations using their detailed scope and adding identification of stakeholders and their requirements or needs would help to meet this requirement? I think the short answer is yes to that. Sorry, I'm just reading through the question again. Yes, the detailed scope stakeholders and their requirements. Yes, that's going to go a long way to meet your context. Context is something, I don't think it's something you need to define so much as to understand. And the context will depend on the type of organization that you are and the way in which you already work. I've got another question here. Can you give examples, please, of leadership and integration where a management representative is still used? Well, the systems that we would certify at the moment would all have a management representative still, because that has been the requirement of the earlier standards. I think it's fair to say the management system should have always integrated with the business. Annex SL, again, is just making that more explicit, but I think certainly in the course of our work we would see management systems which to a greater or lesser extent integrate with the overall business. Specific examples, can't really think of anything on my feet here. Good organizations are already well integrated. I hope that helps. When will all this change be implemented? All the changes need to be in place. The actual 2015 standards will be issued in September, and you have, from a certification perspective, you have a 3-year transition, so by 2018. But you can implement them anytime you like in that 3 years, and again, we will be giving you detailed guidance on that. I am setting up a system for 9001. Can I get it certified to 2008 version in December of this year? Yes, you can. Yes, no problem with that. Would you expect to see a documented risk assessment? Not necessarily. I would suggest that depends on the context of the organization. A large, complex organization, yes, I probably would. A smaller, informal organization, not necessarily. You would judge these things on a case-by-case basis. The more important thing would be, has the organization in some way thought about its risks? Doesn't, I believe, necessarily have to have written them down. Please could you elaborate your comments on the disappearance of preventive action? What has happened in the previous version, certainly of 9001, there has been a specific requirement for preventive action and a specific requirement to have a documented procedure for preventive action. That is no longer an explicit requirement. That's not to say you shouldn't still do that, but the thinking is, with Annex SL, with the high-level structure and the more explicit requirements in many areas in that high-level structure, making its way into the detailed sector standards, the very act of having an effective management system is a preventive action in itself. So that is the thinking that has gone on behind that. I hope that answers your question. What objective evidence would you be looking for to confirm adherence to the clause on leadership? There are various sources that you can go to. Talk to the leaders in the organization. Again, that will depend on the context, how senior and how easy that person or group of people are going to be to see. But ideally, you want to talk with the leaders. You want to talk to the leaders about their organization, about their context, about their strategy. and we would try and do that, I would suggest, at least once in a 3-year cycle. But more than that, there will be minutes, there will be strategy documents, there will be business plans, there will be communications, internal and external communications. All of these things will give you some insight to the leadership. I think one of the exciting challenges of the new standards and of Annex SL is that we can exercise a lot of flexibility in trying to ascertain these things. The reduced need for documented information, but the increased need to look at things like context and leadership means that we will go about looking at things perhaps in a slightly different way. Am I right in thinking that ISO 22301 is written to the Annex SL standard framework? Yes, I believe it is. There are already a couple of standards that are written around that framework. Will you let us have a copy of the presentation? Yes, we shall be making that available to you. A recording will be available on YouTube, and we'll send you details of that. When will NQA have auditors who can assess, meet the new standard for both 9001 and 14001? Very soon is the short answer. Within the next month or so, we should have auditors who could assess you. Not necessarily all of our auditors, but there will certainly be, in the short term, a small number who should be able to audit you against the new requirements. Obviously, contact us and we can talk to you on an individual basis about that. Right. My colleague is just reminding me here that we will be writing to you all soon, writing to our clients, asking your intentions in relation to transitioning to the new standard, and we'll be telling you the options available to you and asking you which route you think you will follow, and that will help us to plan our resource in terms of how many assessors we will need by when to help you through that transition. What is the very latest that a system can be assessed against the 2008 standard? I should know that, and I'm struggling. I think sometime in 2017. You're quite right, there is a break point. I think it's around about March 2017, but I'll be honest, I'll have to double check on that. Can you let me know where I can find it online? Do you mean the presentation? We will send you details of that link if it's the presentation that you're referring to. How do the individual standard documentation and Annex SL documentation combine? Is it two separate documents to audit, or sorry, the question's dropped off the screen here. Or are they combined? So how do the individual standard documentation and Annex SL documentation combine? Is it two separate documents or are they combined? It's all one system. Your management system is structured around Annex SL. It's not a separate thing. So the sector-specific requirements are then built around the Annex SL. So we're looking at one system, one set of documentation. And I've got a complimentary message here. Good presentation, spoken at a nice speed and very informative. Thank you very much, Nigel, for that. And I've got a question here. Is there any training planned for the standard transition? Yes, we're having a series of webinars like this, but NQA is certainly also offering training, and there's information on our website. If you go onto our website and look under training, you will see details of transition courses that we have planned. And that's the last question. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your questions and comments. Please do let us have your feedback. If there's anything we could be doing better, we'd like to know about it. I hope you have found this helpful. The key thing is that Annex SL is driving the requirements of all the management system standards. So those 10 clauses, and in particular the meteor clauses 4 through to 10, your management systems are structured around those requirements, and that's what your auditors will be looking at. And one last complimentary comment. Thank you very much indeed. Clear and helpful, I'm told. So that's nice to hear. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you everybody for devoting your lunchtime to listening to this. I hope you find it helpful. And there will be further webinars, and in particular this Thursday there is a webinar specifically addressing the FDIS 9001. So for those of you interested in 9001, we'll be looking at the detail of that on Wednesday, and you can register online for that, and we'll be doing something similar for the 14001 for those of you interested in 14001. But this high-level Annex SL, that will be taken as read when we come to do the later seminars. We'll be building on the information that we've imparted to you today. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you and goodbye.